April 21, 1519. 508 Spanish soldiers stand on a beach near what would become Veracruz, Mexico, and their commander makes the decision that will doom an empire. Hernán Cortés was supposed to burn his ships. History tells us he did. That one act of irreversible commitment, stranding his men thousands of miles from home with no retreat, became the stuff of legend. It forced his conquistadors forward into the heart of the Aztec Empire, leading to the fall of Tenochtitlan and the subjugation of millions. But what if? What if in that crucial moment, Cortés blinked? What if doubt crept into his mind? What if he looked at those 11 galleons swaying in the surf and thought, we might need those? This single moment of hesitation, this failure to burn the boats, would cascade across centuries, reshaping the conquest of the Americas, altering the balance of global power, and ultimately changing the borders you see on maps today. Imagine you are standing on that beach, watching Cortés give the order. That never comes. To understand what was lost, we must first understand what actually happened. In our timeline, Cortés didn't just burn his ships. He destroyed the psychological escape route of every man under his command. There was no going back, only forward, into the most advanced civilization in the Americas. Tenochtitlan in 1519 was larger than any city in Europe except Constantinople. Over 200,000 people lived on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, connected to the mainland by causeways that could be destroyed in minutes. The city had running water, public sanitation, and botanical gardens that would make European nobles weep with envy. Emperor Moctezuma II commanded tribute from millions of subjects across Mesoamerica. His armies had obsidian-bladed weapons that could decapitate a horse in a single stroke. But Cortés had something more powerful than steel. He had desperation. With no ships to escape to, his men fought with the ferocity of the cornered. They couldn't afford to lose a single battle. This singular commitment, born from burned boats, gave them the psychological edge to forge alliances with discontented Aztec subjects and ultimately topple an empire. But now, the ships remain. Those 11 galleons stay anchored in the harbor, visible from the camp Cortés establishes on the coast, and everything changes. The Spanish soldiers see them every morning, those wooden hulls representing safety, escape, home. In our timeline, men who might have deserted were forced to become conquerors because there was no alternative. In this timeline, there's always an alternative. When Cortés begins his march inland toward Tenochtitlan, he leaves a garrison of 50 men to guard the ships. That's 50 fewer soldiers for the march. More critically, he's divided his force and divided his purpose. The conquistadors who march inland do so knowing they can turn back. When they reach Tlaxcala and see the massed armies of potential allies, when they hear tales of the Aztec capital's impregnable defenses, the psychology is fundamentally different. These aren't desperate men with nothing to lose. These are mercenaries and adventurers who start doing the math. Is the gold of Tenochtitlan worth dying for when the ships, and Spain and safety, wait just weeks away on the coast? The cracks appear during the first major battle. Near the Tlaxcalan frontier, Cortés's reduced force, now just 458 soldiers instead of 508, faces a test by the fiercely independent Tlaxcalans. In our timeline, the Spanish victory here, though costly, proved their valor and led to a crucial alliance. But this time, the battle goes differently. With fewer men and less desperate commitment, the Spanish line breaks during a particularly fierce assault. 15 conquistadors die, and 37 desert during the night, fleeing back toward the coast and those waiting ships. Cortés executes 2 of the deserters he catches, but the damage is done. Word spreads through both the Spanish and indigenous forces. These foreigners can be broken. They will run. When Cortés arrives in Tenochtitlan in November 1519, his force is depleted, demoralized, and divided. Yes, Moctezuma still allows them into the city, a fatal mistake in any timeline. But now the emperor sees something different in these bearded strangers. Not unstoppable conquistadors, but desperate, uncertain men far from home, men with an escape route waiting. The Spanish spend 6 months as increasingly uncomfortable guests in Tenochtitlan, but they never achieve the psychological dominance of our timeline. In April 1520, when Spanish captain Pedro de Alvarado orders the massacre at the Festival of Toxcatl in our history, killing thousands of unarmed Aztec nobles and sparking the rebellion, the divergence becomes total. In this timeline, word reaches Alvarado that more Spanish ships have arrived at the coast. With orders from Cuba to arrest Cortés for insubordination, the fleet that guards their escape is no longer secure. Panicked, Alvarado abandons Tenochtitlan without the massacre, trying to race to the coast to secure the ships. But he's too late. Panfilo de Narvaez, sent by the Cuban governor, has already seized the garrison and the galleons. Cortés's force is now truly trapped, but only after months of half-commitment have eroded their reputation. The Aztecs, watching this Spanish Civil War unfold, see opportunity. They attack not with the fury of the Noche Triste, the sorrowful night of desperate battle, but with calculated precision. They seal the causeways, starve the Spanish out, and by June 1520, Hernán Cortés and most of his men are dead. With Cortés dead and his expedition annihilated, New Spain is never born. The news reaches Cuba and Hispaniola like a thunderclap. The mainland is not defensible. The indigenous empires are too strong, too organized, too numerous. For the next 30 years, Spanish colonization focuses on the Caribbean islands and the northern coast of South America, where diseases still devastate native populations and resistance is less organized. But in central Mexico, the Aztec Empire survives. Disease still arrives. European pathogens travel through trade networks independent of conquest, and between 1520 and 1550, the population of the Valley of Mexico crashes from perhaps 5 million to under 2 million. It is catastrophic, but unlike in our timeline, there is no political collapse. The Aztec state structure, the tribute system, the military organization, all survive. Emperor Moctezuma II, having learned from his near-fatal hospitality, purges the pro-Spanish faction from his court and fortifies the approaches to Tenochtitlan. His successor, Cuitlahuac, takes the throne not as a desperate war leader during conquest, but as a reformer who modernizes the empire to face the European threat. By 1550, the Americas are unrecognizable compared to our timeline. The Spanish hold the Caribbean, Florida, and coastal Venezuela. The Portuguese control Brazil, but the great indigenous empires remain, transformed but independent. The Aztec Empire, now called the Mexica Confederation in diplomatic correspondence, controls central Mexico and has absorbed elements of Spanish military technology through trade and the study of captured weapons. They've even acquired a few horses, bred from animals left behind by failed expeditions, and begun integrating them into warfare. In South America, the Inca Empire faces its own Spanish incursions, but the failure in Mexico has made the conquistadors cautious. Francisco Pizarro's expedition to Peru never departs. Investors won't fund an Incan conquest after the Mexican disaster. Instead, the Inca face a slow, grinding series of coastal raids and eventual disease pandemics that weaken but don't destroy them. By 1600, 3 major power blocks have emerged in the Americas: Spanish coastal colonies, the transformed Aztec Empire, and the disease-ravaged but politically intact Incan realm. The border between Spanish Florida and Aztec Allied territories runs along what would be the modern Mexico-Texas border. The 17th and 18th centuries become a chess game of empires with very different rules. European diseases continue to take a horrific toll. By 1700, the indigenous population of the Americas has still declined by roughly 70%, but political independence allows the surviving populations to adapt and rebuild under their own governance. The Aztec Empire modernizes unevenly. They acquire firearms through black market trade with French and Dutch merchants eager to undermine Spanish power. Mexican nobility send their children to European universities, mostly in France and England, to study engineering, military science, and political philosophy. By 1750, Tenochtitlan has a population of 150,000 and features a bizarre hybrid architecture. Stepped pyramids alongside European-style government buildings, ancient causeways now supporting wheeled traffic. The empire is neither fully indigenous nor fully westernized. It's something entirely new. The North American continent develops differently too. Without a secure Spanish base in Mexico, the northern expansion of New Spain stalls. The French from Louisiana and the British from their Atlantic colonies encounter not empty lands or scattered tribes, but organized resistance backed by Aztec-supplied weapons and political coordination. By the time of the Industrial Revolution, the global balance of power is fundamentally different. The Spanish Empire is weaker. Without the massive silver mines of Potosi and Zacatecas fully under their control, Spain never becomes the dominant European power of the 16th and 17th centuries. This shifts European wars and alliances in subtle but significant ways. France and England, finding the North American frontier more contested and complex, invest differently in their colonies. In our timeline, the United States expands westward with the concept of manifest destiny, a seemingly inevitable sweep to the Pacific. In this timeline, that expansion stops at roughly the modern Texas-Mexico border. Because beyond lies not scattered indigenous tribes, but the industrializing Mexica Federation, a nation of 12 million people with its own railroads, factories, and modern army. The map of North America by 1900 shows three major powers. The United States, smaller, occupying roughly the modern Midwest and East Coast, the Mexica Federation, and British Canada. California and the Pacific Northwest develop under Mexica influence as semi-independent trading republics. All of this, an entire world transformed, because 11 ships stayed anchored on a beach in April 1519, because Hernán Cortés hesitated, because his soldiers kept their escape route open and fought without the desperate commitment that makes conquerors of adventurers. History teaches us that the burning of the ships was a master stroke of leadership. But what if it was actually desperation masquerading as strategy? What if Cortés succeeded not because of his brilliance, but because he left himself no alternative but to win or die? The question echoes across centuries. How many of history's great achievements were simply the product of eliminated alternatives? How many conquerors triumphed only because retreat was impossible? And how different would our world be if, in crucial moments, leaders had kept their escape routes open? The ships you don't burn become the empires you don't conquer, the people you don't subjugate, the histories that never get written. On that beach in 1519, Cortés was supposed to burn his boats and walk into legend. Instead, in this timeline, he kept them and walked into his tomb. Sometimes the most important decisions in history are the ones we decide not to make.